There we go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 All Iowa Reads Author Webinar Presentations. My name is Janae Jackson Doring. I'm the Youth Services Consultant with the State Library of Iowa. And with us are Helen Dagley, the reference librarian at the State Library, and our adult All Iowa Reads author, Tim Johnston. You'll also meet Christina Wyman, the children's All I Reads author for 2025, and Byron Graves, the teen All I Reads author for 2025. So here we go. Our itinerary today. We are going to have an introduction from Helen of the All I Reads program, and then you will hear from our three authors, Tim Johnston, author of Distant Sons, Byron Graves, author of the teen novel Rez Ball, and Christina Wyman, author of the children's novel Jawbreaker. We will also share some All Iowa Reads resources, how you can promote the books at your libraries through book clubs and discussions, and we will close with some upcoming events and closing remarks. And now I will turn it over to Helen.
Good morning, everyone. Pleased to have you here today. I think we have a really exciting lineup this morning. I'm going to give just a quick few words about the history of All Iowa Reads. It was established in 2003, which makes it the State Library's probably longest running program. But I should add to that, and also in the history of the State Library, one of our most successful programs that just keeps on giving out and giving and getting back. It's just a wonderful statewide cooperative venture, and it involves all the readers that we can think of, which is wonderful. So anyway, the purpose of the program, as you I'm sure already know, is to foster a sense of unity through reading. So that Iowans are encouraged to come together in their communities to read and talk about a single book in the same calendar year. These days, originally, of course, All Iowa Reads was just the adult program, but these days we have two other components. We have the adults, and we also have the teens, which includes readers from 12 to 18 approximately. I've read some of the teen titles myself, and as an adult, you know, I have no problems reading them. They're about the same level that I read at, and they're wonderful. And also we have a kids program, which is kids from about ages 8 through 12. So next slide, please. Sam? Okay. So before we get to Tim, I'd be very amiss if I didn't introduce the members of our adult All Iowa Reads committee. They're all wonderful library staff librarians from public libraries around the state, and one who is a bookstore owner in Des Moines, which is Beaverdale Books, so that would be Hunter Gillen. Then we have Jill Gray Martinez, who is at Cedar Rapids, Cameron Kronsnebel from Charles City, Catherine Young, Kate, from Des Moines, one of the branches on the north side, Kayla Becker, who is an adult service librarian in Norwalk Easter Public Library, just outside Des Moines, Leslie Heinzler from the Iowa Department of the Blind, Mara Strickler, who was the director of Pella Public Library, but is now in California, and Mike Jorgensen, who I believe Mike told me he was joining us today, so he's out there somewhere listening to all this. He's from Coralville. Anyway, I'm so appreciative of all the people on this committee, because they're year-round readers, and their jobs involve the written word and authors and events to do with writing and all kinds of wonderful things that libraries are so good at and continue to be so good at. But all year long, these folks read and they bring their suggestions to the committee meetings so that we can discuss each one. They recommend them, and people read portions of the books on the committee. And then we get together again and we discuss what they've read, and they come up with a different list based on what they've read. So it's a real process that goes through a number of hoops before they get to the final cut, so to speak. And then they decide from a short list of titles and come up with the read for the next year. And of course, this is a really good one. Tim, wonderful to have you here. And most of the people who are participating in this workshop today have not yet read the book. Some have, but most of them, it's going to be a pleasure to come. So that being said, I'm going to give you a few short words of introduction to Tim. He is also the author of a number of other works, including Distant Sons, but also The Current and Descent, the story collection Irish Girl, and the young adult novel Never So Green. The stories from Irish Girl won a number of awards, including an O. Henry Prize, which is like the cherry on the sundae for short story writing. But also the collection won the 2009 Catherine Ann Porter Prize for short fiction. Tim's stories have also appeared in the New England Review, and the Iowa Reviews, and a number of other publications. Tim holds degrees from the University of Iowa and the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Tim has been a carpenter for most of his adult life, and he has also taught creative writing at the George Washington University and the University of Memphis. He is the recipient of the 2015 Iowa Author Award and currently lives in Iowa City. So all that being said, it's my pleasure to introduce Tim, and I am going to turn the screen and the mic over to Tim.
That might be a big mistake, but thank you very much, Helen. I'm going to start my timer here so I can see just how close I am to nailing my 20 minutes. But thank you very much. That was really cool to hear about the selection process. So I want to thank the committee too for putting in all that time and work to make those selections, which was really a really unexpected and cool honor, and makes me very proud to be an Iowan. And I also want to congratulate Christina and Byron for their selection also. I'm looking forward to hearing their presentations. I wanted to thank all the Iowa librarians. I know a number of them have checked in, but I just want to thank you for all that you do for your communities, which I think is even more than you know, and for your love of reading, for your love of books. I know there's a Coralville, someone in the audience is a Coralville librarian, but I wonder if there's any Iowa City librarians out there, because I grew up in this town and I have very strong memories of going to the old Iowa City Public Library. If you know the old Iowa City Public Library, it was in an old sort of classical stone building that's still there, right across the street from where the new library is. But my mother would take us there, and I have very vivid memories of being in that space, and the old smell of books, the smell of great old books, and the light coming through the old windows, and carrying an armload of books up to the checkout desk. And I know that library, that space, and those librarians were not only preparing me to be, a lifelong reader, but they're part of why I'm here in front of you today. So I want to thank them and all of you for that. I see that there's Caitlin Clark shirt in the background. That's totally accidental. I should have moved that. Don't know what I was thinking, but so I have been asked to speak nonstop for 20 minutes about Distant Sons and my writing process and characters and things like that. But speaking nonstop for 20 minutes was not something I learned at the Iowa City Public Library. So I'm a lot more comfortable with kind of the Q&A sort of format. So if you don't mind, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to Q&A myself with some cards I've got here. And when I reach 20 minutes, hopefully someone will just cut me off. But I'll keep an eye on my clock over here. The first card, it's an actual card. How would you describe Distant Sons in 10 seconds or less? So funny you would ask that. When the book was being, before the book came out back in 2023, my publisher actually asked those of us who had books coming out at that time to create a short video for a big marketing meeting, team meeting for marketing and sales meeting is the word I'm searching for. And these videos had to be 10 seconds and they had to be, you know, kind of funny or cute or whatever. And since I had 3 books with Algonquin, my publisher, I lined these 3. Well, I think we have a video. I think Sam has a video set up for us. I'll just let the video do the talking.
We do. You should be seeing it now. Is that true?
I see the image, yes.
Okay. All right, folks. So the talking starts right away. And I'm just going to actually just make sure I'm doing this exactly right. Okay, the opt share for video is right. Checked. Okay, so here it comes. Tim's 3 books lined up in front and a cute video to sell.
I don't see the video, just so you know. I don't see the video.
Okay, hold on. We got to do this all right because I don't want to ruin this. This is Pupper's big moment here. All right, we got Tim's 3 books all lined up. Here we come.
Pippa, which book is about 2 young men who meet by chance and set off a chain reaction of violence in a town where 3 small boys went missing in the 1970s? Show me. Distant Sons, you're right. Good job, good job.
Oh, what a good dog.
She's great.
Thanks, Sam. I'll the 10-second version went, if you couldn't hear it. Pip, which book is about 2 young men who meet by chance and set off a chain reaction of violence in a town where 3 small boys went missing in the 1970s? Show me. There's totally no treats involved in that. She just recognized the back jacket. Okay, it's time for another card. Cute video. You mentioned that Distant Sons is your 3rd novel with Algonquin. Are these books mysteries or thrillers or what? Like Descent and The Current, the other two books you saw there, Distant Sons genre identifies as literary suspense, but all 3 are often found on mystery shelves and thriller shelves. They might even be on those shelves in your libraries out there. But it's kind of interesting because I actually don't really read mysteries or thrillers as genres. Just not really into them like many people are, which maybe begs the question, well, what do I read? And I'm just going to give you one example from the last 10 years of reading, and it's a book called it's called Open City by Teju Cole. And it's a book that has virtually no plot, but is so beautifully written and so psychologically interesting and intricate and astute that I keep reading it over and over. It's not the only book I read. You see some others in the background there. I do read some of those. But that's just kind of where my tastes lie. Now I see I'm being prompted for another card. So you don't consider Distant Sons a mystery or thriller? I think what I'd like to say is that I don't consider myself a writer of mystery or thrillers. And just to give a little biographical context, I mentioned earlier that my mother would take us to the library, and that included my older brothers and my younger sister. And I had my oldest brother who was about 4 years older than me. And he would hand down books that he loved to me, and who also read a lot. And so I was reading a lot of books a little before I was probably ready for them, which was really great. I think it's always better to be reading up than the other way around. But that is how I came to, as a young person, Stephen King, who scared the absolute crap out of me, and so became one of my early loves as a reader. And I was reading Stephen King all through middle school and all through high school, and right up to the point where I started going to the University of Iowa, and I became an English major, and I started reading, literature. And this was in Iowa City, as I might have mentioned, and which is where we have the Iowa Writers Workshop, which you may have heard of. And no one was talking about genre, least of all horror, least of all writing it in the halls of EPB, the English Philosophy Building. So I began writing fiction at the University of Iowa, and I was being trained and in the kind of established vein of literary realism. And I got, pretty good at it, and good enough that I went on to get my MFA. After I got my BA at Iowa, I got my MFA at the University of Massachusetts. And once I had those two advanced degrees in reading and writing fiction, Helen alluded to this earlier, I went out and started hitting things with a hammer, which is what you do, which is to say I became a carpenter. But that's another story, and we'll talk about that some other time. Let me get caught up with my cheat sheet here. Oh, and we got another card going. Oh, but the point is, no, we don't. The point is, so all my formal training and ambition was toward literary writing, but somewhere along the line, my inner Stephen King kind of woke up, and I started writing stories that, had missing persons and unexplained violence and stories about the monsters who live among us. But I basically wanted to take my sort of literary training, my literary story writing, and add an element of higher stakes, even scary stakes, but still trying to write, the best, most sort of literary story I could write. And that brings me back to Descent, the first of these 3 books with Algonquin, which took me like a good 6 years to write. A very sort of slow and laborious process, so it felt. So when readers and early readers and reviewers started talking about it as a, like a white knuckle page turner, I was like, wait, what? I spent a lot of time writing that thing. It did not feel like a page turner to me. And then when my publisher, Algonquin, wanted to market it as a, a white knuckle page turner, I was like, wait, what? And in fact, they in the original jacket copy on the back, after saying a bunch of stuff about the book, they said it heralds the arrival of a new master of suspense. And I was like, no. Can we change that to like master or storyteller or something like that? Because I just wasn't, it just didn't sound like me. It just didn't make sense. But so I've had to come to terms with reconciling my, all this, my sort of training and ambition with the whole white knuckle page turner stuff, which is, I have to admit, I won't lie, has been easier since people started buying the book and reading it. That helped. But anyway, the books still show up on mystery and thriller shelves, and probably even in your libraries, and I'm coping with that. Okay, where were we? Next card. Oh, we were talking about Distant Suns. How would you describe the novel in more than 10 seconds and without the help of your dog? Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I was actually given a chance to do that to do a 3-minute description of the book for another Zoom meeting with the salespeople or somebody, and I'm going to just sort of read that from the script, more or less. So yes, Distant Suns is literary suspense, but it's also a mystery, and also a ghost story, and also a monster story. In the 1970s, in a small Wisconsin town on the Mississippi River, 3 small boys go missing. But one boy for 3 summers running, and then nothing. No 4th summer, no 4th boy, just years and years of silence and speculation until that story becomes the town's kind of defining story and almost its curse. A monster came and took 3 of our boys. What did he do with them, and why did he stop? And that's the setting, the cursed village, where the rest of the story takes place. And the rest of the story is set in motion when 2 young men on the road, both with troubled pasts of their own, arrive by chance in the small Wisconsin town 40 years later, meet by chance, and by their very presence, trigger a chain reaction of violence and revelation that will have devastating consequences, not just for their own lives, but the lives of nearly everyone else they meet in the small town. Devastating consequences, but also beautiful ones, such as unexpected friendship, such as solace for old sorrows, such as love. There, that's the 3-minute dog-free version description for you. Now we get another question. So who are these 2 men who come to the cursed village, and what made you want to write about them? Okay, excellent character-based question. They are Sean Cortland and Dan Young. And if those names ring a bell, it might mean that you read one or both of the previous 2 novels. If you have a really good memory, you might remember that at the end of Descent, the first novel, Sean Cortland is in an old truck following his family, who is in the family station wagon, and they're leaving Colorado after their ordeal there, and they're heading toward home, toward Wisconsin. He followed them, the line goes, for now. 2 words that are sort of easily skipped over, but to me always meant that Sean most likely isn't going back to Wisconsin with his family, and that he's probably going to be on his own now. And he was all of 18 at the time. Or you might remember, as some readers definitely do, that at the end of the current, Dan Young's truck is found just short of the Mississippi on the Minnesota side, as if he were going to cross into Wisconsin. And it has a bullet hole in it, in the truck, and there's no sign of Dan Young. And by the end of the novel, there's still no sign of Dan Young. And so you, like some people, you may have thought, well, that I must be planning a sequel, which I was not. I just kind of liked the ambiguity, and I left it like that. So, but then somewhere along the line, getting back to Distant Suns, I had this notion of the crossing paths idea, where each of these young men from these 2 previous novels would somehow cross paths and thereby begin an entirely new, unrelated story. Their paths would still be their past. The books that they came from would matter, as all characters' pasts do, but they would not be carried forward into this new book in any real plot way. Now, for many years, I have believed in a piece of wisdom that goes, if you have a great idea for a story, don't write it in your notebook. Notebooks are where great ideas go to die. Instead, do your best to forget it, the great idea, and if you can't, then start writing it. About a year ago, after I've been following this wisdom for years, not knowing who the author was, and someone told me maybe a year ago who it was. No one can raise their hands, but I wonder if anyone knows. It was Stephen King. Yeah. So I didn't know if the crossing paths idea was a great idea or even an advisable one, but I did not write it down in my notebook, and I did do my darndest to forget it. But the more I thought about it, I kept thinking, well, there's kind of a spatial and narrative logic to these 2 guys. They were both sort of heading toward Wisconsin the last time we saw them, or seemed to be. And the more I thought about that, the more this idea sort of wormed into my head, and I couldn't get it out, and I couldn't think around it to some other ideas. So eventually I just started writing it to get it out of the way. And 2 years and about 100 drafts later, here we sit talking about it. That's the next card prompt. So does the reader need to read the previous 2 books to understand Distant Suns? No, again, definitely not. The earlier books had nothing to do with each other. And the real challenge with writing Distant Suns was to create another entirely standalone novel that was true to each character's past, true to each of those two previous books, but without getting bogged down in the details of those books and without giving spoilers, except one, which is obviously Dan Young lives. And the next card is, and yet you do consider these three books a trilogy. Now, yes, now I consider them a trilogy. I was secretly thinking about it, you know, all along while I was writing it, but I never said it out loud, and I didn't say it to editor agents or editors or anything like that. But I openly cite Cormac McCarthy's Border trilogy as a role model. And if you've read those books, you know that the first two books have sort of similar themes and environments and even protagonists, and these two young men who cross the Mexico border and get into all kind of horse-related trouble. But each book can be read entirely on its own and be totally satisfying, and they are. And in the third novel of that trilogy, the two men have become friends by virtue of being in the same part of Texas and working on the same ranch. But you never see how they become friends. They're not that much older, but they are older. And again, you can read that third novel and read a completely satisfying novel and not even know of the other two. But it's true, if you have read the other two and you know their former stories, it does sort of deepen and enrich the third story in ways that it wouldn't otherwise. In the Distant Suns trilogy, which I now call the Heartland trilogy, we see the very first moments of this new friendship when they actually cross paths and meet and change each other's trajectory, and then everything that happens because of that chance meeting. So I mentioned I didn't tell anybody that I was doing this sort of crossing paths idea, and I didn't know if it would succeed or I would get away with it. But when I sent it to my agent, who didn't even know I was really working on a book for a long time, I just kept it all very secret. She read the book and she really liked it, and she had no idea it was connected to the previous two, which she had sold to Algonquin in earlier years. So that was like, yes. And then we worked on the book some more, and we sent it to my editor, and she wasn't the editor of the first two books, but she was very familiar with the first two books and wanted to edit the new one if it were suitable. And she wanted to buy the book, and she had no idea that it was connected to the first two books. So I was like, yes. Next card. Oops, that's the wrong way. Oh yeah, I'm kind of running out of time. I'll go to the plots question and process question. So how do you, what is your process for plotting? So I'm not a plotter, I'm a pantser, which means I fly by the seat of my pants, and I kind of just make things up as I go along. That's not to say I don't have an idea where I think the novel's going to go or where it might end, but I often don't get there, or I get there by I get some other way by some surprising means. And I think that is one of the crucial and most exciting things for me about writing is being surprised by what happens in my own stories, my own narrative. And I think if I'm not surprised, then the reader is probably not going to be surprised. And after all, isn't that one of the great joys of reading too, is being surprised? And my last card is, you're out of time. Let someone else talk for a minute, why don't you? All right. So thank you.
Helen, I think, are you popping on here to lead us through some questions? Tim, I want to ask a question if I can, selfishly. So I think
5 years old.
in my next life, I want to be a carpenter. But I want to hear from you how you feel like you tie your work in carpentry to your work as a writer.
Make sure you wear knee pads when you do that in your next.
Okay. Okay. I'll get myself some knee pads, but
Well, I didn't really talk about the specifics of the plot, the storyline in Distant Sons, but the two young men really meet over a job that needs to be done in this small town. It's a way for Sean Cortland to make some money so he can get back on the road, but it's a carpentry job basically, and they both have carpentry backgrounds, or Sean has a carpentry background and Dan has more of a plumbing background, and so they team up to do this job for this old codger who lives in the woods, who may or may not have something to do with those three missing boys 40 years ago. So it's always a real joy to me, even though I don't really practice carpentry anymore, other than the stuff I need to do for my own old house here. But it was a real joy to sort of live in that world in a descriptive sense, in a writing sense, and talk about the process of, without going crazy. I mean, we did have to edit out a lot of the stuff that I wrote about carpentry, but my brother calls it carpentry porn, which I think was a compliment. But I think that, process wise, there's a lot in common. I mean, you take some raw materials and you have a sort of vision of what you're going to build, and you do your darndest, and you have a good eye for it, and you pay attention to details, and then you sand and varnish, and hopefully you have something beautiful at the end.
think about all of the scraps left behind in woodworking and in writing, right? That you see beautiful things on the shop floor at the end.
I actually have my folder when I take stuff out and I don't throw it all the way together, all together out into the trash. My folder for that is called scraps.
There you go. Yes.
Go.
My dad's a woodworker and has never once thrown away a scrap of anything. Which is, going to be a problem in a few years when his garage.
It does make for a crowded environment.
There we go. Helen, I will now I will stop. And if you want to turn your video on and lead us through these questions that have come in, thank you for answering my question, Tim. Thank you for the book. This is really pleasant.
Yes, and actually, as we're talking here, I'm seeing some questions coming down the pipe in the chat zone from people who are experiencing this out there in the state. One of them, Karen, has sort of scooped a question that I had for you. She says, explain the title. And I was going to say, the significance of the title, Distant Sons. Tell us more about the title and why you chose that title, and anything else you could care to say about the title.
Yeah, titles are always interesting. Of the three books that I've mentioned, The Current was the only one that I had that title throughout most of the writing, and that the editors liked and never changed. Descent was a last-second decision. I'd worked with a working title through all of that, and I had a different title through all of Distant Sons too. Can I remember what it was? Oh yeah, it was because of the carpentry and things done malevolently with hands. It was called With These Hands, and they just thought they just didn't think that was catchy enough, and so we all started pitching ideas about title ideas, and we had Sons was probably gonna get in there somewhere or another, and we were trying to figure out a nice, catchy, punchy kind of two-word title maybe, or 3 words at most. And I think that Distant Sons I came up with as a reference to these two guys who are sons who have sort of, still sort of on the youngish side, who have left their families and gone away to sort of live their own lives and find their own way. And they're distant from sort of the world and their communities. They're kind of outcasts in a way. And then there's the connection of the 3 young boys who have been missing, in a really radically distant way for 40 years. And all that sort of gets tied in together. So, and it sort of resonated. And I like the, if you just hear it, you might think we're talking about celestial matters, distant sons. And I always like the ring of something that has a, something that rings with two meanings. And it does happen. It's not a big deal. It's not a big thing in this book, especially, but Sean Cortland is a kid who knows stars and celestial bodies and things. And so I always kind of like that kind of hint of his interest there.
Lovely. Thank you. Also, I had this question as well about the setting, because it's a small town setting, which is familiar to many people who live in Iowa that are not in the metro area where I am right now, but are in small towns all over Iowa. But also, the tone is it's more of a blue collar area, somewhere in the upper Midwest, but it could be small time Iowa as well. So can you shed any light about how the location itself might have impacted the decisions made by some of the key characters, where they live and what life is like there, and it's different than it would be in the metro area here in Des Moines. And that's kind of a wide-ranging question, but I'm hoping that you can find something in there that you could elaborate for us.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, I grew up, in Iowa City, small town Iowa City. It's not a super small town. It's a college town. But I had relatives who lived up, in small unknown communities near Waterloo. And I remember going up to those communities. And but I've always kind of identified, even though I've lived in metropolitan areas like DC and I lived in LA for many years, it's never occurred to me to want to set stories in those environments. For whatever reason, I'm drawn to, people who make a living working with their hands. I'm drawn to the idea of sheriffs. There's a detective in this story, but in the previous two books, there's sheriffs. I grew up on a river town. A lot of people have, but a couple of the books take place on river towns, and this is one that takes place on the Mississippi River on the Wisconsin side. And interestingly, or I think it's sort of interestingly, I have a town in mind. I won't name it. It is sort of secretly named in the book if you're paying attention, but I don't really like to give town specific names, so people start they start fact checking my logistics, if this street is really there and that building is really on that street and all that kind of thing. So I want to be able to play fast and loose with the landmarks. But this is a real town, and I just sort of I always thought I'd better just go visit this town and spend a little time there. But I also just didn't want to, because I wanted to just keep it imaginary mostly. Although I did visit it by Google a few times, which is an amazing thing to be able to do. You can just sort of look at it from above and see the trees and the layout and all that kind of stuff. And there's a sort of the layout kind of matters, because there's on one side there's the river, and it's a border that's hard to cross, and on the other there's bluffs. There's a deep set of bluffs and woods. And everything takes place sort of in between those two boundaries and out in the woods. And I really like that idea of that sort of enclosed space, enclosed by nature.
Well, and that to me also brings up another question, because that sort of closes things in, but it's relevant to one of the elements that runs through the book is the role that chance plays in meetings and developments and lives of characters and so forth. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I can try. I mean, the whole book was premised on a chance meeting between these two characters, and had I really had to forced that meeting, I probably wouldn't have written the book, but it seemed to me, as I mentioned earlier, they were sort of on a kind of collision course. And the meeting itself is very inauspicious. They hardly talk at all at first, and they certainly don't know each other, and they go their separate ways, and then they meet again down the road a little bit. But the idea that you know, Sean's even there, stops in this little town because his truck breaks down. I mean, it just happens to be this town, and it happens to be an expensive of enough repair that he's got to make some money before he can move on again. There's an implication that he might have been going to see his father in Madison. And the guy who helps him out gives him a ride to the mechanic shop. You know, they get to talking, and he says, well, I know this old buzzard in the woods who needs some work done, but I'm not going to do it. And maybe you want to do it. And here's his number if you want to. So it's just these series of chance encounters, which I really love. And like I was saying earlier, everything, the more I feel like things are surprising me, the more I'm getting out of the story myself, the more the writing is interesting. And that has to do with, you know, chance encounters with people, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time. And it also has to do with characters. You know, I mentioned the guy who gives Sean a ride and tells him about the old codger in the woods. He could have become a character in the book. You know, he could have ended up mattering, but he doesn't. He's just a catalyst for that. But another character, like the detective Viegas, who has to interview Sean because he's already gotten into trouble. He hasn't been there long. I just needed a detective to interview him that, you know, got some of the story out. But then she becomes, by one way or another, sort of interested in why Dan Young is in her town. And so she becomes a real character in the novel, and one that, you know, people have really responded to. And so I like those chance encounters, and just seeing what comes with them. If the character who just seemed to be passing through actually becomes a meaningful character. And that goes back to, you know, not plotting. It's really, the writing process is really just a kind of process of chance also.
Yes. Well, I think maybe we have time for just one more question, because I see it from one of our committee members who is on board with us today, Mike Jorgensen from Coralville. He's asking, how did you decide if and when a character's secrets are shared with other characters and with readers?
Well, that's a tough one. I kind of want them to keep their secrets as long as they can, and I think they have to sort of be forced to give them up. There has to be some. They have to be trying to get out of a situation, or help somebody else out of a situation. But it's not just, oh, by the way, this, you know, this happened to me. It's like, I guess the example is when Sean finally figures out that the detective is trying to figure out what Dan Young is doing in town. Well, this could really sort of complicate Sean's effort to finish this job and get paid. You know, that's what he really wants. And so he has to go to Dan Young and say, what the heck is going on with this detective and you? And at that point, you know, Dan kind of has to tell him. And what it does is, even though Dan didn't want to tell him, it brings them closer together, because now Sean understands something about his past, Dan's past, that is kind of similar to his own. So I think it needs to really matter to the direction that the characters go. Once the secret is revealed, it should have an effect on where the story goes from there.
This is all so intriguing. Just another deep dive into the book. So lovely. Before we move on, I do have a question from somebody who asked if you're available for local book discussion groups, or an Iowa author talk in person in Iowa. And certainly you can answer, but to the person who asked the question, I'd say, do you want to send me an email and I can probably send your stuff on to, if it's okay with Tim, on to Tim so he can respond? Or you can say now, no, I never do that, or yes, I'm open to doing that, or whatever you want to
Imagine me
say.
saying that now, saying that no, I can't, I won't do that. No, no, I've done a lot of book clubs, and always have a great time with them. Sometimes too great of a time. There's usually,
Wonderful.
sometimes there's wine involved, but yeah, no, if it's local enough, if it's not, too much of a haul for me, then sure, yeah,
Super.
yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful today. I really enjoyed it. So that
Thank
is
you.
saying
Me too.
something too, because yeah,
You learned more
absolutely
things.
loved it. Thank you.
Thank
So,
you. Thanks everyone.
over to, let's see, Sam, are you on, or a slide coming up next, or?
Actually, Helen,
Here we go.
I'll
There
go
you go.
ahead and
There you
jump
go.
in.
There's Janae.
And thank you to Tim. Thank you for the awesome presentation. We are going to move to our teen selection, and I want to give a shout out to the Teen All Our Reads committee members. They did a phenomenal job of going through a lot of the books, reading 50 pages, then narrowing it down to the final selection where they're reading the entire book. And they did a phenomenal job with the discussions. It was just wonderful. So a big thank you to Dr. Ambry Reefer of Hudson Public Library, Angie Shear of Manchester Public Library, Bailey, excuse me, I have to move my camera real quick. Bailey Kemig-Gierke from Carnegie Stout Public Library, Erin Coughlin, who was originally with Nevada Public Library. She is now at the Ankeny-Kirkendale Public Library. And Lauren Roberts from Oxford Public Library. A big thank you to all of these wonderful individuals who took the time to read and have thoughtful discussions. And with that, we are with Byron Graves, our 2025 All Our Reads teen author, and I'm going to read an introduction really quickly. Byron Graves is Ojibwe and Lakota. He was born and raised on the Red Lake Indian Reservation, where he played high school basketball. When he isn't writing, he can be found playing retro video games, skateboarding, or cleaning up after his cats. Rez Ball, his debut novel, won the William C. Morse Young Adult Debut Award, the American Indian Youth Literature Award for Best Young Adult Novel, and the 34th Annual Reading the West Best Young Adult Award. Rez Ball was a 2024 Boston Globe Horn Book Fiction Honors Book and a winner of the Colorado Book Award for Best Young Adult Novel. Byron has also had his work featured in the English Journal. Other stories from Byron can be found in the anthology All Signs Point to Yes. His highly anticipated second novel is set to be released by Heart Drum, which is an imprint of HarperCollins in 2025. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Byron. And let's see. Oh, there he is. Hello, Byron.
Hey, thanks for that wonderful introduction.
I am going to stop sharing my screen so that way we can, oops, sorry about that. There we go.
There we go. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Super excited to be here. I'm going to apologize in advance. I am battling a head cold, but I did not want to miss this for the world. So I apologize if you hear any coughing or sneezing, or if I have to pause periodically to blow my nose. But just so you know, that's what's going on over on my side. So Rez Ball, I want to talk a little bit about where I'm from and how it impacted what I wrote, and a little bit about myself, and then kind of go into how I write, why I write, my writing process. So growing up on the Red Lake Indian Reservation in northern Minnesota, beautiful, beautiful place. It's the landmass of Rhode Island. check it out sometime. It's the biggest lake that's within a state, biggest freshwater that's within a state. It's gigantic. When you sit on one side of it and look at the other, it's like being on the ocean. One of my biggest dreams in life was to see the ocean, and I finally did recently, and I was like, oh, it's just like being at home. So the sunrises and the sunsets are so beautiful there. It's a sovereign nation, and growing up, I was doing like commercial fishing with my parents. We would set nets at night and then you go pull them in the morning. We would pull the fish out of the nets. We would bring them to the fishery on ice, and that's how we made a lot of our money was through that. There was a lot of hunting. I remember like partridge hunting and hunting for deer with my dad growing up. And then we spent a lot of time at powwows or sporting events. And it was back in the 80s, so there wasn't internet, there wasn't infinite entertainment on an iPad. So we really spent a lot of time playing outside and doing things like that. But I think that like really impacted my view of sports. The frustrating part for my dad though was that he passed away about 10 years ago, but he was Mr. Sports. Like if there was sports on TV, he was watching it. If there was sports somewhere to attend, we were at it. But I was into comic books and video games, and he couldn't get me to go like play catch or go play basketball or anything. And growing up, I was kind of like the outsider, the outcast, the like nerdy loner kid. I didn't have a ton of friends. I wasn't popular. If I asked a girl to a dance, I usually got laughed at. And so that was kind of my world. And I kind of was like okay with that in a way. But then it was like 1992, Summer Olympics in Barcelona. And I was walking by the TV one day, and my dad was sitting there watching the game like he usually would. And I saw what they called the Dream Team. It was Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, all the best players. And I stopped, and it was this magical poetry in motion. And I sat down, like my jaw dropped, and I couldn't stop watching it. From that point on, I watched every single Olympic game that the US was in, and I became obsessed with basketball. And from that day forward, I was outside in the morning, bright and early, sun coming up before the school bus would come, shooting jump shots, working on my handles. Um, and every single day from there, I was finding books on basketball drills, how to get better at basketball. And my life changed overnight, and I just naturally was good at basketball, and I picked it up really quick, and I became one of the better players at our school. And all of a sudden kids started to bond with me. Kids started to pick me first to be on their team, and I started to feel this like self-confidence and this self-esteem I never had before. And that made me love it even more. And before I knew it, our basketball team in Minnesota was ranked number one in the state. We were beating teams 20, 30, 40 points a game. It was fast paced. We call it Rez Ball, which is like the title of the book. It's just run and gun, fast paced, kind of like if you're from Iowa, the way Caitlin Clark will like pull up on a fast break and shoot a three from 25 feet deep. And people were loving it. And that was kind of rare to see that long ago in the late 90s. But during that time, we had so much media attention. We ended up on ESPN. We ended up in USA Weekend. A journalist from Minneapolis. And being in Red Lake, you don't interact with a lot of people who aren't from your reservation. It's very isolated. So to have a journalist come, and he followed our basketball team around for a year because he was going to write a book, a nonfiction book, just following us as a journalist. And it opened up my whole world to have conversations with this guy. His name's Frank Clancy, on long bus rides through the rural Minnesota. It's 2, 3 hours to get to a game, 2 to 3 hours to get back. And I was just picking his brain about what's it like to write? What kind of stuff have you written? How did you get into it? And from that point on, because of that, I think that started to plant some seeds in that I could see things outside of my reservation and outside some of the work or jobs that I had seen previously. When basketball ended, I'm only like 6 feet tall, so there's not a lot of 6 foot players that make it to the NBA. So I was a little delulu, as the kids would say, a little delusional. And I went from this low, like I was saying, where I was a kid who didn't really have much and didn't really have any friends and not popular, to having this like feeling where I was signing autographs and taking pictures and I was super special, to it being over and it was just done. And I went to a really dark place for a while. And in that dark place, I kept wanting to find something that would give me hope, something that would bring me purpose or meaning. And I would go work, jobs, just average frontline jobs, customer care jobs, food industry jobs, just making kind of minimum wage. And but I always had this idea that I was going to do something that felt as special as basketball did, but I didn't know what that would be. I always had a penchant for music. I loved music. I loved lyrics. And so I got this wild idea one day that I was going to start a band and I was going to be a singer, even though I really can't sing. But I was writing song lyrics and music. The more I played around with music, the more I strummed a guitar and got better at playing guitar, music just started to like pop into my head out of nowhere. And I would hear a song. And then I would wonder, like, what song is this? Is this a Beatles song? Is it a Nirvana song? What song is this in my head? And I would start writing it out and start playing the chords. And before I knew it, music was just pouring into me and lyrics were pouring into me. So I moved from my small town to Minneapolis to pursue this dream of making a band. Started putting ads out, started going to shows, started to talk to people, networking, and I would form a band for a minute. And then someone would quit or someone just didn't have the same drive I had. They played a different genre of music. So I compared it to, it's kind of like winning the lottery, right? You have to have 4, 7, 21, 53 all on the same night, all on the same time. So it's like lightning in a bottle. And it got really frustrating. And I went through like, God, 3 or 4 years of trying to make this happen. I was taking vocal lessons to get to become a better singer. I was learning guitar better. I was really putting in the time and effort. And with basketball and with music, I could see when I went from not knowing a thing about it to when I put in the time, the discipline, studied it. And so I started to see, hey, I can almost pick up anything, and with enough hard work and enough learning and enough commitment, I can make some progress. Maybe I don't get all the way, but I can sure go from 0 to, 7 out of 10. But music got so frustrating that I quit, and I was really, really bummed out because I thought that that was going to be my thing I was going to do with my life. And then I was like, you know what? You really loved writing. You really loved like coming up with song lyrics. You really loved telling a story in like 3 verses in a chorus, but you needed all those other people. What if we could find a way to like do that on our own? No rehearsal space, no compromise with other band members, not spending a ton of money, because I didn't have money. And so then I was just like, what if I started writing? And I have a really unorthodox like journey to becoming a published author. Because I didn't study it in school. I don't have a degree in creative writing. I wasn't a huge reader growing up. I have like 3 or 4 favorite books. The Thief of Always, Where the Red Fern Grows. Outside of that, it was really like comic books. I really loved comic books. So I didn't even really have a foundation for like, how do you do this? I think if you read 100 books, you can kind of start to see how they do it, beginning, middle, and end, how they answer a simple question like, how do you write opening up a car door? Like, I didn't even know how to write that type of stuff. But just my will and my delusion was like, I'm just going to sit down and I'm just going to make it happen. So I started writing a book, muscled my way all the way through it, then was like, okay, now what? I have this book on my laptop. It's inside there. Where do we go? So I got Publishers Marketplace, which some of you might be familiar with. Back in the day, I don't know if it's online now, but it was this gigantic like yellow pages for agents and publishers. And you could see what genre they were interested in and their contact information. So I would write a whole like handwritten letter and send it to these agents and send it to these publishers with my it's called a query letter. It's kind of your 1-page pitch on like, here's my book and here's why I think you should represent me. Got all these rejection letters back. You could tell they were very polite, very cordial and professional, but probably copied and pasted, just saying, hey, thanks for reaching out, but we're not interested. That didn't deter me at all, as it maybe should have. It didn't. I was like, well, it was my first time. Of course it wasn't great. Let me do another one. So I wrote a second book, same process, got rejected, wasn't really learning how to write, but I was always a huge fan of the 1980s like DIY punk scene and punk bands. They would go make their own flyers. They would create the artwork, print it up at a, copy machine shop, and they would go hand them out places. They would go record their own album and they would hand the album out outside of shows of bigger bands, and they were just making it happen on their own. So I was like, I can do that same thing with my writing. So I self-published a book, and I had saved up several $1,000s over the course of this last few years with the plan of quitting my day job. That's always the joke that you tell a friend who's like a really bad comedian, right? Like, you're like, do not quit your day job. I quit my day job because I was like, I'll make royalties off this self-published book and I have some money saved up and I'll just live off of ramen and whatever, sleep on friends' couches. During that time, without a 9 to 5 and with this like new focus on becoming an author, and now I felt kind of like that awful dream you have where you don't have clothes on and you're in a Walmart. I felt like naked and exposed, and I was like, "Hi world, I'm an author." I told all my friends, family, coworkers. So I felt all this pressure. So I started getting real with myself, and I was like, "You know what? Do you even know how to write a book? I don't think you do." So I started to look for lists on like what are the top 100 books of all time? What's the best fiction? What's the best this? What's the best that? And I sat down, and for the first time I just started to devour book after book after book. You know, Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Stephen King, whoever it was that I could get my hands on and that who was on that list of like some of the best books of all time. Then I bought books on how to write. How do you plot? What structure look like? You know, Saves the Cat is a brilliant book for anybody who's trying to figure out how to put together a book. Style. What's your voice? What does that sound like? What's the flavor of your writing? How do you write good dialogue? Sin and Syntax is another book for style. And so all of a sudden I was like, oh my God. I looked at the book that I had self-published and I was like, it's so bad because I could for the first time see what good versus bad writing looked like. Then I was like, okay, now I have it. Now I know what I'm doing. Now I know how to write. So I wrote a third book. And with that third book, I was still trying to tell stories that resembled books that I had now read, books that were mainly by Caucasian authors who were straight, who had a whole different life than me and were writing stories probably that represented their world. So I hit this roadblock where I was like, okay, now, you know, stylistically and logistically, I know how to write, but what's my story? What's special about what I want to say and what would make the fingerprint of your soul come across into a story? And then I had this epiphany. I was like, well, you played high school basketball, you're from a reservation, who am I and what story do I want to tell? And all of a sudden, these characters that I was writing that went from very like rice pudding, bland, nothing unique or special, nothing gripping about them. The world in the story was just kind of bland, very vanilla. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, the character's my mom. Oh my God, the story when this happened and that happened in my life. So I took my real life with the autonomy of fiction and then was able to go like, holy crap, I've got it now. But writing is such a long, lonely road. You're sitting at your laptop in a basement, in a coffee shop, wherever, a beautiful summer day, and your friends are going to go swimming. You're not going with them. You got to sit down and work on this writing if you're really committed. Family wants to hang out. You got to turn them down to sit down and write. So I'm sitting here with this passion, this excitement, and this great idea, but also wondering like, am I wasting my time? Is this book also going to get rejected? Life is short. I've lost a lot of friends and family members over the years, and I know like this week could be my last week. We just never know, right? And I'm sitting here working on a book that no one might ever read. So the last level of me getting to where I got with Rez Ball and the success of Rez Ball and what's special about Rez Ball was figuring out that I wasn't writing for myself. It wasn't about like making money or becoming a published author or any of that. What really drove me at that point, what my magic moment was who was I writing this book for? And why was I writing it? And I was like, it's for a kid on my reservation who loves basketball or loves sports, but hates reading. And I knew how much my life changed when I became a reader. My vocabulary expanded exponentially. My worldview, my understanding, my empathy, my ability to write, even an email to a boss or communicate with people, it just transcended anything I had ever done before. And I was like, it's so important for a kid who came from a high school like mine, where we have one of the highest dropout rates in the country. Not a lot of people, one of the lowest percentages of high schools to college percentages. It's a very rough school. And so you almost have to like self-educate yourself in a lot of ways. And I know the importance of that because I saw it happen to myself. So I started to write Rez Ball with that intention. So I made it fast paced. I had a swear word sprinkled in there. I had a party scene because I wanted it to be a book where a kid would pick it up, kind of like if you remember the controversy of like Marilyn Manson at the time, or the controversy that surrounded Eminem, like the NWA. The more like kids are told they shouldn't check it out, the more they want to. And so I've had teachers tell me when I've gone to school visits that Rez Ball was the first book that they had where kids were reading it when they weren't even like supposed to be reading, when it was just like, okay, we'll have some free time or go to recess or you guys have a minute. People were picking it up and reading it. And I was like, why do you think that is? And they said part of it is that they really loved it and it's a good book, but the other part is we read out loud in class and they wanted to find the part that had a funny part or a swear word or an awkward part. And they wanted to pick out and they wanted to find it and say in advance, hey, on Tuesday, I'm going to read out loud. So that was kind of a funny experience. But I've had so many friends and family members and people from different reservations tell me how much this book has meant to them. How I had a kid come up to me at a book signing and he said he was Afro-Indigenous and he was a basketball player and he waited in line for an hour to come up and get a picture and an autograph. And he said, thank you for writing this. And I was like, kind of taken aback for a second, but going like, oh, okay, yeah, of course. And he said, I never thought as an Afro-Indigenous basketball player from a reservation that I would ever see myself in a book. And one of the main characters in this is an Afro-Indigenous basketball player. And I kind of knew that, but having somebody say it in real life in person to me made it, I'm back, like you travel back in time sometimes into your memory. And I was like, that moment, this is the kid. So Rez Ball and my writing has taken on a meaning outside of myself. And I've become a huge advocate for finding books and finding stories that can make kids fall in love with reading and get them interested in reading. And thinking outside the box sometimes. I think like comic books and graphic novels sometimes get a bad rap. Because to me, reading's reading. If you get a kid reading, it can be that gateway to them reading more. So for me, Rez Ball, fast-paced basketball action, and like I was saying, all the different things that you're like, I don't know if this should be in a book, but it's in it, and it makes kids read more and makes kids finish it up. But yeah, that's my story. I think we're pretty close to Q&A time.
Wow, I'm just blown away just from hearing your story and just seeing your pathway to from being in a band, basketball to learning how to write novels. I mean, it's inspiring and it's amazing. And I love how you took that ability from songwriting and transferred it from telling a story in song to telling a story that's accessible for kids, for teens and for adults. It's phenomenal. And you talked about comic books. What were some of your favorite comic books that you read? And please ask questions in the chat too.
I initially fell in love with Superman, kind of the same way that I fell in love with basketball. I was walking by the TV one night, went to be the annoying kid who goes to get a glass of water even though they're supposed to be asleep. My mom and dad were watching the 10 o'clock news, and as a kid, like 11-year-old, 12-year-old kid, nothing's more boring than the news. I'm like, why do my parents want to watch the news? So I'm walking by, and on the news, on the real news, they said, Superman died. And I stopped, and even though I had never read a comic yet, everyone knows Superman. And I was like, what? Superman died? Like, was he real? Like, so I stopped and listened and watched it. And then I begged my mom the next morning to bring me to a comic book store because I had to see, how did Superman die?
Right.
So I fell in love with that story. But then from that point, becoming a comic book junkie, I started to just check out a bunch of different ones. And X-Men really, really hit home with me. I always felt like I bonded with that story, like especially like some of it being a mutant kind of felt parallel to being a Native American and indigenous person. Being Two-Spirit kind of felt like being outside, and you can be loved by some and hated by others, and all you're doing is trying to exist. But the X-Men are always trying to do good, and they always want the best for everybody, even though they're hated by the world. And so that connected with me in a really deep way.
Awesome. Thank you. For those that haven't read Rez Ball, can you just share about Trey and what the story is about for those who are just hearing about Rez Ball for the first time?
Yeah, I would love to. So Rez Ball is a story about Trey, who his older brother passed away during the middle of the basketball season. And Trey hasn't played varsity basketball yet when the story starts. He's just been trying. He's on the JV team, but he hasn't had a shot yet. And so The story is really about grieving your brother, the parents in it grieving their son, the teammates grieving the loss of their teammates. The team in this book is a really tight-knit group that have played together since third grade, the same team, and they're going into their senior year without their best friend and their star player who was like getting recruited by Division I schools, maybe was going to go to the NBA. So when Trey joins the team, he's kind of almost ostracized as the new guy. He knocks somebody out of the starting lineup who finally got their chance to be a starter. He has friends, his real friends, that are kind of like the goofy, nerdy loner kids like I was. So he's navigating these social landmines of like still being cool with his real friends, but then also trying to like fit in with the jocks now. He's falling in love for the first time with a girl who just transferred to the school from Minneapolis. So she's got a little bit more of an outside view of the world, and she's a very strong female character who tells it how it is. So all of those dynamics mixed in, and Trey's grieving all at the same time, and he fits in with this team and starts to become himself and starts to fill his big brother's shoes, but also in a way that's honoring his big brother. And the whole team is like, we're gonna go win the state championship this year for him. And so that's the whole thing, is how sports can bring people together, especially in a time of darkness and a time of grieving, and give them something to look forward to and give them hope and something to cheer for. So I wanted all of those dynamics kind of sprinkled in with what sets like a Native American athlete apart from maybe their surrounding communities.
Thank you. Talk about for me the just the writing process when you were writing Rez Ball. What was the hardest scene to write, or a real fun scene to write? Can you share some of those moments with us?
Yeah, one of the hardest scenes to write for me was there's a scene at Christmas, and it's their first Christmas without his brother or without their son. Um, and there's that, I've had this happen in life, losing loved ones, that first holiday, especially like Christmas, the first like birthday that passes by without them. So that scene was really hard to write because I remember going through that with my dad or going through that with my nephew. But then having the like story of like he's getting a pair of basketball shoes for Christmas that were the same type of shoes that like his brother would always wear. And so there's this moment where they're connected still in a way because of the gift that he gets and the mission that he's on. So that was a tough scene to write, but I think it's one of the most beautiful scenes in the book.
Thank you. And I remember talking with the committee about just this basketball scenes when they're actually competing. We had so much praise just reading those scenes and just saying, wow, this is awesome. Tell us a little bit more about those scenes, and were you kind of reliving those days? And also, what position did you play in basketball? I was looking and I couldn't find what position you played.
So growing up, like when I was, sixth, seventh, eighth grade, ninth grade, before I joined the varsity team, I played point guard, and that was kind of fitting for being 6 feet tall. When I joined the team, they had almost won the state championship the year before, much like the story in the book. And they had a bunch of guards, and they had a bunch of great three-point shooters and great passers and ball handlers. So I was trying to figure out, how do I make the team? How do I get some minutes? How do I fit in? And the thing I didn't see them doing was just being a menace on defense and being an outstanding rebounder. And I had this way of watching how many spins a basketball would do and what angle it would hit. So I could actually
Ah,
tell which way the ball was going to bounce almost through like science. So I was getting like 15 to 20, 23 rebounds a game. So I was playing forward and going against people who were a lot bigger and stronger than me, but just with that anticipation of the ball and just having that grit and that heart, I started to play almost the entire game, every game. And then I found my niche. And then that's just kind of how from that point on, I was a chameleon on any team you put me on.
wow,
But I
that's
learned
amazing.
that lesson for like life. Like in life, when you're on a team, you're at work, you're in a situation, sometimes you have to figure out, what can I bring to the table that maybe nobody else is. So it was kind of a life lesson too.
Absolutely. Thank you. Um, I noticed you have a playlist in for Rez Ball. Can you share some of the titles that are on that playlist? And did that help you with your writing as well? Since you were in a band, like what were your favorite songs from that playlist for Rez Ball?
Yeah, I love music so much, and music definitely helps me when I'm in a scene. If it's a scene that's really fast-paced in action, I like to play music that matches that. But I also wanted to like make sure I brought the flavor of my reservation, and my reservation plays a lot of hip hop. So I made sure there was some Tupac songs in there. California Love is always kind of a fun party song. And
Yep.
even all these years later, it's kind of like Michael Jordan, like Tupac has kind of just transcended time and people will constantly kind of come back to him. So having Tupac in there and just having some hip hop in there was definitely important. So I could transport you into that place if you wanted to pop onto that playlist and then be like, what song are they listening to? It's right there for you. So I thought that can kind of be a fun way to like get a little deeper into the story with the characters. There's a Youngblood and Machine Gun Kelly song called I Think I'm Okay. That one's kind of like a pop punk emo song, which I felt fit with some of the characters. So some of the stories represent a character, and some of the songs represent a character, and some of the songs represent like what's going on in a scene.
Wow, that's awesome. Um, gosh, you read so much. It sounds like you're reading so much now. What are you currently reading right now?
I was a teenage slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. I'm currently
Yes,
reading that. It's so good. I picked
it's
it up at an airport the other day. It's a really big book, so it was very heavy in my backpack on the airplane and off the airplane. But oh my God, it's my first, I'm sad to say it's my first Stephen Graham Jones book, but now it'll be the first of many. I can tell.
awesome. And your newest book that you're working on right now, can you share a little snippet or tell us a little bit about what that's about or the title?
Yeah, so the title of it is Scate, which is Lakota for play. It's spelled like skate, but with the little accent on the E, so you kind of know how to pronounce it.
Mhm.
It's a story that's kind of a cousin to Rez Ball. I made the character's journey a lot harder because a lot of kids on my reservation do have it a lot harder than Trey and Rez Ball. The character in Scate, he is forced to go and live with his grandparents because he doesn't have a dad and his mom is struggling with addiction and going to rehab. And but it's a summertime book, so you're going to the July parade and fireworks, and you're going like tubing and rafting, and it's but the main character is really learning how to skateboard throughout this summer, and he's awful at first because he's never skateboarded before, versus Trey is like really good at basketball. This is more of the story of a kid picking up something that they're not good at and sticking with it and finding like a love for something. That it's very much about like escapism and finding something that can like give a kid meaning during a tough time in their life. So there's a lot of fun and there's a lot of learning, and then there's a lot of grit to it. So it's got a lot of different dynamics, but very parallel with Rez Ball.
Awesome. And I see in your background, is that a Winona Ryder skateboard?
Yeah, that's her
Wow,
from Beetlejuice.
very cool. How long have you been a skateboarder?
So I picked up skateboarding to write Scate, because I wanted to like really know what this character felt like stepping on a skateboard for the first time or
Mhm.
progressing with some skills, how scary it is to fall for the first time. So I wanted
Yeah.
to experience that all firsthand. The way with like Rez Ball, I had played basketball, so some of those scenes are probably a little sharper because I did it. So I wanted to have that
Absolutely.
same experience with Scate. So I dislocated my left shoulder. I've taken some bumps and some bruises, but I got pretty good. And I think it helped me tell a better story. I'm kind of like a method actor, but for writing, I like to go and do the thing I'm writing about.
And it brings it to life. That's the thing. When you're experiencing everything that you're trying, it really makes the writing more sharp and more on point. So, this has been fascinating. And we thank you, Byron, for joining us today. And I'm sure people will have more questions as they come along, but thank you so much for joining us. This was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Excellent. We're right at 11:20, and we are going to move to, oh, and Angie's saying thank you so much. And she says she's so excited for Byron's next book. This is awesome. And Christine, there's a lot of love. Great to hear your process. Awesome. Thank you guys. I am going to pull back up my screen, and I'm going to move my camera real quick. We are going to move to the children's selection or the kids selection. But first, I want to give a shout out to our Kids All Ira Reads committee members. They did a wonderful job of choosing wonderful children's books. Again, we read through 50 pages of the titles that they were considering. And then once we narrowed it down, they read the entire book. We had thoughtful, careful, meaningful discussions. And this committee has been wonderful to work with as well. We do have some friends who on our committee that are leaving because their term is up. So I want to give a shout out to Brianna Glenn from DeSoto Public Library, Eleanor Glui from Grinnell College, Emily Haig from Scott County Library System, Becky Bilby, Sioux Center Public Library, and Renee Greenlee from Cedar Rapids Public Library. Again, give them a round of applause, a shout out in the comments because all these committees, they've done a phenomenal job. So thank them. Please thank them in the comments, and to those that are outgoing with Brianna and Eleanor, thank you guys so much. You guys have provided such wonderful insights. Again, thank you. And with that, we have our Children's All Iowa Reads 2025 author, which is Christina Wyman. But before we get into Christina's presentation, I'd like to read her bio or introduction for you. Christina Wyman is a teacher and writer living in Michigan with her husband and silly rescue cats. They're named Alfred and Greta Cannoli, not to mention the raccoons, owls, and hummingbirds that occupy a tree outside their bedroom window. She grew up in a tiny apartment with her family in Brooklyn, New York, where she dreamed of becoming a writer. Her work has been published in New York Magazine, The Washington Post, Ms. Magazine, and other outlets. When she's not writing, you can find her stocking up on chocolate or trying to convince her husband to adopt more cats. I hear you on that one, for sure. Most recently, she developed a passion for eating strawberry jam right out of the jar. And her new middle grade novel, Slouch, was released in October 2024. If you want to learn more, you can follow her at ChristinaWymanBooks.com. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Christina Wyman.
Thank you, Janae. Are we good? Can we hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good to go. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And thank you also to everyone joining us today, and so many congratulations to the nominees. It's been a pleasure learning about your work, and I'm honored to be in your company. So I thought I'd start with a short book talk and then maybe mix it up a little bit with some slides and background information that get at some of the my motivations for writing Jawbreaker. I'll also read a tiny bit from the book, and then if there's time, I'm happy to talk about the writing process or anything else. So again, thank you, Janae, and the All Iowa Reads Committee for selecting Jawbreaker for your book for kids, and also the State Library of Iowa for sponsoring All Iowa Reads. I started out as a middle school English teacher in New Jersey, and the support for literacy and reading is a global imperative like never before. And I mean it when I say that we are all in this together. So I think Jawbreaker is a book that I've had inside me for a really long time. The main character, Max Plink, is really going through it. Early on in the book, she says, "It's open season on kids with a mouth like mine." So this means that Max requires intense orthodontic intervention, and she actually might need surgery to fix the way her jaws are aligned. And all of this has meant that Max is the butt of some very cruel jokes, many of which are instigated by her own sister. So even though braces are normal, there are many reasons for why Max feels quite alone in her experience. So with Jawbreaker, I really wanted to create a story about a child who doesn't have a safe place to land, be it at home or at school. And I think that's something that a lot of kids resonate with. And we really learned that over the pandemic in particular, just how much children were in crisis during that time. Not all children have emotionally supportive families that step in when difficulties arise. And many children actually have families that make things harder on them emotionally. So that heartbreaking reality is also something that writing Jawbreaker has allowed me to highlight. So being chosen for all Iowa Reads really validates the importance of highlighting the kinds of childhood experiences that, believe it or not, are still a bit culturally taboo to address in children's literature. So for me, Max represents everything about the kinds of books that I wish I would have had access to in the 80s and early 90s. Due to her physical appearance, she experiences the sort of bullying and harassment that I think by today's standards would be considered illegal, probably. And also by today's standards, her parents are what might be considered emotionally neglectful. They're completely self-involved and checked out and doing next to nothing to nurture a positive relationship between Max and her sister, and perhaps most importantly, between Max and herself. So had I had access to books featuring these kinds of dynamics with the same intensity that narrates Max's daily life, I think I would have felt a little more normal as a child. And even as I wrote Max's story, I had to remind myself that we now know as a culture that what she experiences is sadly common. But above all, I wanted a character who was able to find pockets of protection and nurturing, despite the obstacles she faces at just about every turn. And what she couldn't find at home, she eventually finds in friendship and teachers, and the courage to face the world with a face that initially made her want to hide. So that's Jawbreaker in a nutshell. And what I thought I would do is I dig a little more deeply into, some background information and stuff like this. So I am going to share my screen. Just give me one quick second. Okay, can we all see the screen?
There it is. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I kind of framed the rest of this around what I talk to with students and what children really, and what tends to interest them. And I always start my book discussions with the question, what's hard or challenging or difficult about middle school? And, they throw a lot at me with that question. So we have family and friends and boundaries, and drama comes up a whole lot. Adults who don't always help the way they should, or maybe the adults make things worse in certain situations. Some of them mention bullying, which is totally predictable. We know now, the social sciences know that a huge percentage of kids report experience with chronic bullying. Of course, insecurities comes up, so our relationship with ourselves and fitting in with our peers, whatever that means to an individual student. And lots of students bring up having lots and lots of big responsibilities and sometimes having to worry about things that kids shouldn't really have to worry about. I'm trying to move on here. Okay, here we go. So they often ask why I wrote Jawbreaker, and it's really for all of those reasons that they themselves bring up before I even get into the book. But the other big reason is that all of my books are really personal projects. So I like to show pictures that inspired some of the storytelling. And this picture is of me at 8 years old. And so I'm around the 3rd grade at this point, and this was approximately when I learned from others, of course, that something was quote unquote wrong with my face. And from there, we would learn as a family that I needed some pretty intense orthodontic care, which is essentially Max Planck's story. She's a child who has what's called a class 2 malocclusion and a severe overbite. But the piece that kind of complicates her situation is that she might need surgery, and she doesn't know that she might need surgery. The doctor kind of springs it on her, and that's when she discovers that her parents had known for quite some time that that she might need surgery. And so they kind of kept that from her. It was a very well-intentioned secret, if you will. They didn't want to worry her unnecessarily, but it becomes an issue, right? As it would for any child who has to contend with that. So on the surface, very surfacey, yes, it's a book about a child struggling with this orthodontic story, but it's also a book about a lot of other things. So Max has difficult parents. She and the family discover along the way that dad has what is now called alcohol use disorder. And on top of all of this, she's dealing with a severe level of bullying, really at every turn. So Jawbreaker layers in a lot of different issues that kids often deal with, because some kids, as with adults, for some kids, life is throwing them a lot of hardballs all at once. It's not a raindrop at a time. It's absolutely torrential, and it's just life for these children. So in those ways, Jawbreaker really is pretty dramatic. So I'm going to read a piece of one of my favorite scenes in the book that is not also a spoiler. So in this scene, Max and her sister Alexis are experiencing the usual tension, except this is kicked up a notch, and it centers on Max's friendship with her friend Shirin and Shirin's sister. I get up from my bed. My fists are clenched as I make my way over to Alexis. I'm sorry you don't like my face, I say hotly. My voice trembles, but Shirin and Amy don't mind it. In fact, Amy asked me to put on my Jawbreaker, and she's doing a whole science project about it, so you can take that and shove it. If they think you're so awesome, then maybe you should go live with them, Alexis cackles. It's not like anyone wants you around here or anywhere else. Maybe I will. Once again, my attempt at bully-proofing myself is a total failure, because Shirin and Amy are more like sisters to me than you'll ever be, because they're nice people. Ever think of that? They're actually good, decent people. And Shirin can't even believe that you act the way you do. She sees it in the cafeteria, she sees it in the halls, and I tell her what you do on the bus. But the joke's on you, because everyone knows that Vince and Carlet aren't your friends. Not really. And you look like a total joke hanging out with them. And everyone sees how pathetic you are, thinking that you're Miss Popularity. Dad's at work, and I hear Mom puttering around in the kitchen, which is only literally about 12 or 15 feet from my bedroom. I feel like I should lower my voice, but I'm on a roll. You're a 6th grade loser jerk bully who can't even come up with an idea for her own science project. Maybe you should ask Amy for advice on how to think for yourself. And while you're at it, maybe you should ask Amy and Shirin about how to be a good sister, a good person, because you know what, Alexis? My saliva is flying, and I see some of it land on her shirt, but she doesn't seem to notice. You suck. You suck as a sister, and you suck at life, because only people who suck act like you do. And you can say whatever you want about me, but everyone knows what a pathetic excuse of a sister you are. I went too far. I know I went too far. Alexis grabs the picture of Shrin, Amy, and me off the floor. Hey, I yelp, but it's too late. She rips it directly in half, right down the middle, and rips it in half again. Then she takes the side that has Amy on it and rips it to total shreds. She throws the pieces at my feet before stomping out of the bedroom. I hear Mom call to her to help in the kitchen. Part of me worries that she'll tell Mom about our fight, but then I remember that if we're caught fighting, Alexis will just get in trouble too. We both know better than to tell our parents if something bad is happening. So I read that scene because I've noticed across time, talking with both children and adults, that there's a lot of surprise around the fact that Max's younger sister is actually her biggest bully. And I think it's probably that dynamic, that sibling dynamic, is not a dynamic that gets talked about a whole lot. So children are surprised, and people are surprised to see it in this book, but it's actually a really common dynamic, not just to have siblings who bicker, but to have siblings who are absolutely in crisis. And Max and Alexis are in crisis. And this seems to be something that stands out to a lot of readers. So Jawbreaker is a book about a kid who is really going through it, but I also like to write the kinds of stories that give kids a different ending, something that feels a little more resilient and hopeful. So I wanted to share a piece about what my happy ending looked like, and it took a very, very, very long time, but a lot of people don't know this story unless they know me personally or get to ask me during a school visit or a bookstore visit or something like this. When we were kind of kicking around ideas for what the cover should look like, I sent my editor a picture of 12-year-old me. And I mean, I'm not an illustrator, I'm not an artist in that way, so I have absolutely no idea what goes into designing covers. I know it's intense and I know it's important. And really the best I could do was just give them a picture of who Max could possibly be out of all of the options. So that is a picture of 12-year-old me. And the cover of Jawbreaker is designed from this picture. And what I like most about the picture is the bigger piece that it represents. So when I was 12, now I need to say Jawbreaker is absolutely not a memoir whatsoever. But it's based loosely around a lot of things that I know well. And some of what I know well involves being 12 and having a really complicated and devastating home life situation, and being 12 and having a complicated mouth, you know, which is also the essence of Jawbreaker. So these are some things I know well. But what I also know well is being a kid who at the same time has moments of joy. So this picture on the left, I remember it well. It was taken during a family vacation. We were camping or something. And that's me, my sister, a cousin buried in there, and my father. And he was wrestling with us. And I know he was like, that's what was going on. You kind of can't tell that it was him wrestling with us because of just the picture itself. But I know that's what's going on because I know my father. And so approximately 30 years later, we recreated that scene on the right-hand side. So that was just a lot of fun. That picture brings so much joy, even though it does represent a really hard and complicated time. So I love sharing that with kids especially, because if there is a child in my presence who's going through something rough, I'm hoping it inspires them to also think that not everything has to be really rough all of the time, you know, 100% of the time. So I really like sharing that story. Janae, how are we on time?
See, we are at 11:40, so you are doing perfect.
Okay, so I'll take a few more minutes to just show some pictures that inspired some of Jawbreaker's fictional settings and scenes. So all of these are taken from Google Maps. And when I think of where Max grew up, where she spent her childhood, I can only think of Brooklyn and where I grew up and spent my childhood. So the pair of windows on the left actually belong to my bedroom, and the pair of windows on the right belong to my parents' bedroom. So we lived on the second floor of this very small apartment building, which gave me a lot of fodder for where Max came to be, okay? When I think about her experiences at school, I cannot help but to think about the school building that I spent, I don't know, I guess 5 or 6 full years of my life, I don't know, ages 5 through 11, I spent in this school building. And there are some really intense scenes that happen in this building. My elementary school, this was my elementary school, and the inside, when I attended, I haven't been back in decades, but when I attended, it was absolutely stunning. You walk in and you just have these 2 separate spiral staircases that go in opposite directions to the second floor where the main office is. And it's just, you walk in and it's just kind of like regal. So I attended a very beautiful public school where I have a lot of great memories, but also a lot of really complicated memories. So that's what I imagine Max entering. I imagine her entering those doors on a daily basis with her sister. They go to the same school. This might look like a random street corner, but it's actually the bus stop where I caught the bus to get to my junior high school every single day for 2 years. And that storefront where there's a rent sign on it was actually a deli when I was waiting for the bus all those years ago. And so the bus stop itself is home to several key scenes that happen in Jawbreaker. And so my memory of that corner inspired some of these scenes. This is a very simple picture of Avenue S Park, where I grew up going. My parents took us. We played basketball. We played handball. When I was old enough, I would go there with friends and just hang out on an afternoon or whatever. And Avenue S Park inspired what turned out to be a really intense scene between Max and her best friend at a real threshold moment for them, when it just becomes clear that there are lots of things about each other that they don't know, and it leads to some friendship tension. So they're on their way to Avenue S Park to play some handball when this happens. So of course, the writing process comes up in just about every single one of my visits to schools and to bookstores and so on. So I just wanted to close with the most popular, frequently asked question that students ask me about the process. And that question is simply how, right? How did you do this? Because students are not learning how to write books, you know, in junior high school or really any part of school, unless they go to college and take creative writing, and then maybe there's some kind of specialized thing that they do. But when they are in K through 12, they are not learning how to write books. They are writing essays, and many of them are struggling through writing essays. And those essays might be capped at like 700 words, and it is the most challenging thing for students to wrap their heads around. So naturally, they read this book. It's, I don't know, 250 pages or so, and their question is just how. And teachers also tend to ask questions around the how as well. And I always get this sense that people expect a formula of sorts. Like, you know, they expect me to say, I read 4 really important books on craft, and I consulted with, you know, my writing group consisting of 7 people, and all of those people read my book and gave me really, really great feedback and all of this. And that might be true for some people, and it is absolutely not true for me. When I write my books, I really pull from that age-old write what you know advice. That's advice that I've gotten along the way. It's advice that I've given. I know that the best pieces I read from other people, I know that they have written what they know. You know, when I'm really enjoying that piece, when I'm really feeling that piece, I know it's because they have written from a place of deep knowledge and experience. So Jawbreaker comes from a place of writing what you know, but it also comes, for me, from a place of writing what you feel. I was able to feel the tensions, to feel the longings, to feel just the complicatedness of it all, because in real life, it was very, very, very familiar to me. So I didn't just know it, but I felt it. And I wanted to close that piece with a very specific piece of advice that I got from actually a famous romance novelist. I've read every single one of her books, and I only discovered her in the last decade. She's been writing, I think, for at least 20 years, and I only just discovered her, and I read everything of hers. And I used to ask how did you do this? That was the question I used to ask writers. And so I emailed her, and I told her I loved her work. I told her what I had read at that time. And she actually wrote back to me. This famous New York Times best-selling romance author actually wrote back to me. And her advice was, butt in chair, Missy. And I think it is the best advice a writer could receive. You are not going to write a word if your butt is not in that chair facing the scariest thing there is to face, which is a blank Word document. It is the stuff of nightmares, but you're not going to get it done until your butt is in that chair, Mr. or Missy, right? So, so that's sort of my closing, but because I am talking to the state of Iowa, I am just going to show you my cats. So now everyone in Iowa gets to see my cats. Greta is the one screaming on the right. She's a real drama queen. And Alfred is older than her. He's bigger than her, and he tackles her to the ground, which is why she screams, but they're not hurting each other. They play. And that's them, you know, they're very naughty. And now Iowa knows all about it.
I love it. Oh my goodness. They are adorable.
I end all of my presentations with my cats. I have to do it.
How old are your cats?
Alfred is turning 7 this year, and Greta is turning 2.
Adorable.
Yeah.
My goodness. And your presentation was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
I have to ask, so with Jawbreaker, what scenes were hard to write? Were there scenes that were hard to write or easy to write? Can you walk us through some of the scenes if you're willing to share?
Of course I am. You know, I mean, I think writing is hard no matter what, no matter who you are, right? You know, I think I think Stephen King would say that writing is really, really, really difficult in almost all circumstances and situations. We all know he's a real button chair kind of guy, right?
Oh, yeah.
That said, so Jawbreaker is my first book. So it was my first experience putting a project of this type together. So I will say there are a couple of things I can say about this. Dialogue, for some reason I don't understand, comes really easy to me. I don't know why. Dialogue is really easy for me. Description, I can't stand it. So Janae, you have a really beautiful background behind you. And if someone tasked me with writing, you know, a one-page description of this background that other people would actually want to read, I'd have a really hard time with that. So I would say generally, I love dialogue. I don't love description. But that said, what I discovered about myself in my first experience putting a project of this type together is that I hold back, apparently. I hold back on complications, on difficulties, on opportunities to really relay the emotional complicatedness of a scene. And I didn't learn that until my editor pointed it out to me. So, for example, there is a scene where I don't want to give away, well, it is kind of a spoiler. Janae, what do you think a spoiler? Should I do that? Should I give this example or no?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Because I want to be respectful of people who may not have read the book. So I'll try to be not very spoiler-y about it. There is a scene toward the end where Max's bullies have seized an opportunity to really embarrass Max in front of the entire school at a showcase for the 6th graders. It involves a PowerPoint presentation. It involves pictures. It involves her younger sister in collaboration with the bullies, because the younger sister and the bullies are friends, or so the younger sister, Alexis, thinks. That opportunity that the bullies seize is a real turning point in the book because of everything that happens after that moment. In an earlier draft, I actually made it such that the plot was discovered before anything bad could happen. So my editor said, no, we want the bad stuff. We want the hard stuff. Make this happen. So there is something in me when I am writing a character that perhaps reminds me a lot of my 12-year-old self. The adult therapized version of me wants to protect that character at all costs.
Yeah.
So thankfully, I have an editor who doesn't allow that to happen.
That's awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I have one more question with Slouch. Can you tell everyone a little bit about Slouch also as quickly as you can? Because that is your new book that came out in October.
Absolutely. Slouch is about another 12-year-old who is going through it in a very different way. She is way taller than her peers. She's 5'10" in the 7th grade. And none of this was ever a problem for her until the people around her, her friends and family, just start like hyper focusing on her body. like, oh, you have such long legs, you should play basketball, or, you know, stuff like this. Or you are too tall to have a crush on that guy who's only 5 feet or something in the 7th grade, you know? So she's discovering that people are trying to dictate for her how she should exist in the world because of her height. But in addition to that, she's discovering that complete strangers, say in public transportation in New York City, which is something I'm deeply knowledgeable about, you know, I took the trains, I took the buses, I walked everywhere. Like, that's just life in a city. Strangers start noticing her and they think she's older. So you have these older men making comments to this child, and she's getting a real taste of, wow, for the first time in my life, my body is public property. You know, she doesn't have this language. She's only 12. We have this language as adults, but she's contending with this world where people from all corners and in different ways are just hyper focused on her body. So she has to become a child who overcomes that and develops the language to rail against it. So that is what Slouch is.
Awesome. I love how your novels are just kind of like sharing a light on these situations and making people aware so that way they can change their behaviors. And also, you're educating through your novels to kids and tweens. I love it. This is awesome. And we appreciate your time and your presentation. And Christine says, thanks. I'll be able to relate to Slouch.
Oh, thank you.
So you will definitely have some people that can relate. So thank you,
Janae,
Christina.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I'm going to share my screen with everyone. All right. So you have heard presentations from all 3 authors today. You will be able to reserve a book discussion set here at the State Library and have it sent to your library. All you have to do is contact your district LRT, and their contact information is on the screen. If your library is in Central or Southeast, you'll contact Dory Bowles. She'll be able to help you get those books to your library. If you are in North Central or Northeast districts, contact Tricia Hicks. Her contact info is there. Or if you're in the Northwest, Southwest regions, please contact Amanda Grome. These wonderful LRTs are happy to help you to reserve copies of these books, to have them sent for book clubs at your libraries to promote all Ira reads. We are working with the publisher to get copies of Distant Sons. So once we get those copies in hand, we will get those ready to go for your book clubs. And if you're wanting more resources about All Ira Reads, please visit our All Ira Reads webpage. We have resources related to the current titles, the previous winners. You can read all different types of information about All Ira Reads and the process and the committees. So you can just go to our website at statelibraryof.iowa.gov and type in the search box All Ira Reads, and you'll be able to find all of the information there. And if you're still wanting more books, definitely join us on Tuesday, February 18th from 11 a.m. to noon. We will be hosting the All Ira Reads Exploring the Shortlist webinar. These are the books that almost made it, but they're on our shortlist. So we'll look at all of the shortlisted titles for all 3 categories: kids, teens, and adults. And we'll share resources provided by us at the State Library that can help you plan and execute your own book discussions of the All Ira Reads winners. And it looks like Sam's got the link there in the chat, and you can register on Workday Learning. And save the date for those of you guys that are planning summer reading. Guess what? Save the date because we have summer virtual author visits that are going to be coming your way. Registration information will be coming soon, so please stay tuned for that. But please get these dates on your radar. June 17th from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. We'll have Tim Johnston for Distant Sons. June 18th from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock p.m. We'll have Christina Wyman for Jawbreaker. And June 25th from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock p.m. We'll have Byron Graves for Rez Ball. These will be summer virtual author visits that you can hold in your library. So with your teens, your kids, your adults, you can invite them to have watching parties at your library where teens, kids, and adults can ask questions of the authors. These are free for libraries, so please take advantage of them. And plus, it'll help inspire a teen, an adult, or a kid to become a writer. So definitely check those out this summer. Also, upcoming CE events that we've got going on. You'll need to register on Workday Learning. We have Check It Out on Tuesday, January 28th from 11 a.m. to noon. It's our book talking webinar where I book talk 30 plus books in an hour for kids ages 0 to 18. And also on Thursday, January 30th, sign up for iLock. It's our Iowa Libraries online conference where we'll be talking about assess, adapt, and I can't remember the last words, Samantha, if you can help me.
Assess, adapt, act.
Assess, adapt, act. So we're going to be talking about data and how you can use that data to help your library and help your community. It's an all-day event. Find out more on Workday Learning and register for both events. And with that, we just would like to say thank you so much for coming to this All Iowa Reads webinar. If you have any questions, please reach out to Helen or myself or Sam. We want to thank all the authors. Thank you to Tim, thank you to Christina, and thank you to Byron for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.